You know, it is Intimidate so valuable into Zacian and Landorus, and then, you know, Grimmsnarl's just Grimmsnarl. It's always good, unless you're running into, like, it getting KO'd on turn 1. But because Z has, you know, 3 Pokemon are immune to Thunder Wave, if indeed it is the Thunder Wave set, maybe you don't feel as comfortable bringing it. So, as always, my first question is, what kind of Grimmsnarl is this?
I know. Maybe if we're lucky, Sohaib will bring it that game 1. I mean, as someone who's run Kyogre Zacian a lot, being able to send out Grimmsnarl next to Zapdos is something that's always a really interesting lead. It feels like it gives you a lot of wiggle room to adjust depending on what your opponent does. But I don't know. It's a tough call. Like, it's a lot of this is going to be that information game, you know, figuring out what kind of Grimmsnarl this is, but there is no Grimmsnarl. It's going to be Zapdos and Zacian out on the field for Sohaib as his lead, and Z sending out Yveltal and Regieleki.
So there is so much, like, damage output on the board right now, right? Like, on one hand, Z has the early speed advantage with Regieleki, and Eleki often is going to carry Focus Sash and Electro Web in this position, so you can Electro Web, and then Yveltal can go for either, say, a Max Flare into Zacian, a Max Darkness onto Zapdos. The problem with that is, from Sohaib's end, you could just go for something like a Protect on Zacian turn 1, Dynamax your Zapdos, and then just Max Lightning into Yveltal, and if Z tries to KO the Zacian on turn 1, that puts you actually in a really big deficit. One thing that's also a big deal in this matchup is that Zapdos' base speed is just a little bit higher than Yveltal, so if both Pokemon are max speed, which is typically the case here, Zapdos is going to be faster. So I like Z's decision to bring the Eleki to at least slow it down a little bit, but this first turn is already going to be very fast-paced in terms of offense.
Yeah, Zapdos going for that Dynamax turn 1, giving a incredible offensive pressure already, and we see the Dynamax activation from Z as well. That means that their Yveltal most likely will be slower than the Zapdos, or this could have been a speed tie. So we'll have to see how this is going to play out, but already a good indication that Sohaib is going to be able to land a couple of attacks on this Yveltal if that's his target of choice this turn. We'll start things out though with the Regieleki, a good old Electro Web dealing some nice damage, going to drop the speed of both the Zapdos and the Zacian by 1 stage, and possibly give the Yveltal the speed advantage to go for a Max Darkness into the Zapdos, brings it down just to about 30% of its health remaining. Will also drop the special defense of these 2 Pokemon on the field. It's Sohaib now to attack the Life Orb reveal on that Yveltal. Important to keep in mind for later. Sacred Sword activating the Focus Sash on Regieleki, and that Zapdos following up with a Max Airstream to pick up the KO.
So that was a really interesting turn 1 because, like, Z could have maybe doubled up onto Zacian with the Max Flare, and if Zacian protects there and you do get the Electro Web Darkness combo off, it's a really nice turn 1 for you, right? Because then the Eleki hangs on Yveltal, even if it eats a Max Lightning, the next turn you can Electro Web again. Sohaib here, I think, making a really interesting play, which I really like, which is going for the Airstream rather than the Max Lightning. This means that after Electro Web, you just negate that speed drop now, meaning that Zapdos and Zacian once again are faster than Yveltal, right? And so Z actually did end up bringing out the Incineroar into this matchup. You know, despite going up against Kyogre, that will allow it to, you know, pressure with the Fake Out onto Zacian. But the problem now for Z is that Sohaib can get a very powerful attack off with Zapdos, like a Lightning into Yveltal. So you could Max Guard Yveltal and, you know, go for like a attack to try to KO the Zapdos. That's a possibility, but it's really risky, right? Because if you go for that, like, you do risk just getting like doubled up into, for example. So Zapdos right now has a big Max Lightning potential. You could also switch in Kyogre and Airstream, but it looks like it's not going to be that option.
Fake Out from Incineroar connecting with that Zacian, meaning that only a single attack will be fired off on Sohaib's side of the field. Zapdos with that Max Airstream into the Yveltal, possibly trying to put it within range of a Max Lightning knockout in this next turn, also ensuring that it will continue to be the fastest flying type Pokemon out on the field. Yveltal's own Max Airstream connecting with Zapdos for that knockout will also bring the speed up on Z's side of the field. So really a great turn, I think, for Z, just having that advantage, you know, having that Zapdos already at such low health, allowing them to end the Dynamax a turn early.
The big question I have here is Behemoth Blade into Yveltal, right? If you just get the KO there, Yveltal's relatively low. There is the Intimidate, but Behemoth Blade is such a strong attack. Now from Sohaib's end, you can just bring out the Kyogre, and you can go for Behemoth Blade onto Yveltal and go for your Water type attack onto the Incineroar slot. You could also switch into whatever your final Pokemon is, but I feel like Kyogre is in a decent position here. The question then is, you know, Sohaib knows, and it's actually going to be a Moongus, so maybe he's not confident on being able to knock out the Yveltal immediately, right? That could be pretty scary. The other thing you'd have to be worried about is like a fast Incineroar where after the speed boost, like it can get a parting shot off onto Kyogre before Kyogre can actually get an attack off. So Amoonguss now can go for, you know, a Rage Powder. You can also protect here. And okay, no Rage Powder, it's just gonna be Behemoth Blade to start off, and we'll see if this knocks out the Yveltal.
Going to deal some nice damage thanks to Behemoth Blade's effect,
Yep.
and it is enough to knock out that Dynamax Yveltal. You know, it's so great that Zacian and Zamazenta have the ability to deal twice as much damage to Dynamax Pokemon, because it really gives you that little bit of edge you need. But this Flare Blitz from the Incineroar will connect with the Amoonguss. Brings it down into the red, does not find the knockout. Spore, though, will reveal safety goggles on that Incineroar.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, that turn was a little bit scary by not bringing out Kyogre, because, like, the Yveltal there potentially could go for a Max Guard, and especially because you had safety goggles, you could actually just launch the Flare Blitz into Zacian, but perhaps Sohaib feels like he already has a decent enough lead here with Kyogre in the back. You can Water Spout. The safety goggles reveal is a really big deal, by the way, because it means that Amoonguss is actually a lot weaker in this matchup, and so, yeah, like, you know, one of the questions I had going into this is, what are you going to bring out of your last three between Amoonguss, Incin, and Grimmsnarl? And in this one, Amoonguss ends up being a little bit less effective. So now for Z, you know, you're down to your final two Pokemon. You've got a lot of damage output, but you've got to be scared about a late-game Origin Pulse or Water Spout just picking up a double knockout, especially if Zacian gets a Behemoth Blade onto the opposing Zacian, which it should. Or you could Sacred Sword Incin. Does that KO? It does.
Yeah, it does. Even with the Intimidate, I think Incin had taken enough chip damage to guarantee that knockout. And Zacian not falling for the Rage Powder, instead setting up a substitute, a great piece of information for Sohaib.
Yeah, I think one of the things is how players train Zacians, right? Because some players don't run that much attack investment onto it, but Sohaib has had enough attack investment where it has been able to just knock out the Yveltal and the Incineroar despite the Intimidate. That's a really big deal. And the Zacian's also moving first here, right? And so Sohaib Zacian just feels, you know, really strong in this matchup right now, and he's actually just executed it really, really nicely.
Will break the substitute, but Z's Zacian will have the opportunity to fire off an attack. It is going to be a Behemoth Blade targeting down the Zacian, meaning that Sohaib's Amoonguss might be in a bit of trouble, as that Behemoth Blade was enough to knock out the Zacian on his side of the field. Will be put to sleep, though. So the big question I have now is, can this Amoonguss even deal damage in this situation?
Yeah, Kyogre just comes out, should finish off this game, but...
All right, there is still the Kyogre out there, too.
Oh, it's not even Kyogre! So that explains why Kyogre didn't come out earlier, right? And,
yeah.
you know, it's... In this format, there are a decent amount of games where you just don't bring your other restricted Pokemon, and I think from Sohaib's end, it makes sense because you're worried about a lot of things. You're worried about Alecki, you're worried about Rillaboom, and Yveltal can also, you know, take attacks decently well from the Kyogre, but Incin being, you know, a perfect Pokemon there to just end the game. So both players, you know, making some cool Pokemon choices in that first one, certainly ones that I wasn't like fully expecting. I'm curious going into the next game, you know, do you bring the Amoonguss? I think Sohaib played the first two turns of the game really well. Like the recognition of, I can't just go for, you know, Max Lightning. It's so tempting to target Yveltal there, but as soon as you let Alecki or Yveltal outpace you, you're in such a bad position.
Yeah.
So the idea of airstreaming just to match your opponent's speed control is really important, because Zapdos is naturally faster than the Yveltal here. And so that turn one play is interesting, where it's like, what if you decide to just go all in and KO the Zacian on turn one with a Max Flare, right? But it's so hard to make that play because Zacian can just protect or switch into Kyogre as well. And then I guess the other question is, are you even running Max Flare? It's pretty common on Yveltal, but, you know, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I think there still is a lot of information to be gained, especially about this Yveltal. But the other thing I'm curious to get more info on is, you know, is Kyogre more of an adjustment play for Sohaib going into Game 2 or Game 3, or does he just feel confident in this Zacian alone taking the matchup? You know, there were so many opportunities there that Zacian had taken. You know, the Intimidate, you know, wasn't as powerful as it probably would have liked to be at many points in that game, but Sohaib just very confidently keeping it out on the field, knowing that the Amoonguss would be able to protect it long enough. And I think that's really an interesting thing to call out for a lot of these Kyogre Zacian teams. You know, you don't necessarily bring both of your restricted Pokemon if you know that you can keep Zacian safe enough to just keep that pressure on consistently throughout the game.
For sure, yeah. I think one adjustment Z can make is actually leading like Landorus T, because like Alecki Landorus T into Zapdos Zacian isn't that bad, because you can Electro Web and then Landorus can say either Quake Zacian or it can even Airstream if you expect like Zacian to protect and then Zapdos to Airstream itself. So I think like what that first game has shown, and I think what will continue to be the case, is that the speed control is so important, right?
Yeah.
And Alecki's Electro Webs are valuable, but if you're not picking up knockouts afterwards, then Sohaib can match it with max airstream from Zapdos. And so Landers didn't even come out in that last game, but I think it's certainly one adjustment Z could go for going into this game. Like Landers is the lead, as I mentioned. The tricky thing with the Lecky Evoltal is that the Evoltal was so weak to both Zacian and the Zapdos that, and the Lecky can't really do that much damage to either. So while you get the speed control immediately, if you're not getting a one-hit knockout, right, then it's really scary. So I'm curious if Landers T comes out in this one.
Well, here's the adjustments. Grimmsnarl, the opportunist, and Zacian out on the field for Sohaib. So we can finally play that game of what is the Grimmsnarl holding. Yveltal and Regieleki, again, the lead for Z.
Yeah, so going with the same leads here, I think, you know, from Z's end, you maybe just feel comfortable saying, okay, well, you know, turn one didn't go great. Like, Sohaib made some really good plays focusing on speed, so now I'm going to prioritize playing around, like, the heavy aggressiveness of max airstreams. But Sohaib actually makes the adjustment, bringing Grimmsnarl. I like the decision to bring Grim here for a lot of different reasons. One, you probably expect Z to hyper-focus on the Dynamax Zapdos on turn one, and so now revealing that it does indeed have the light screen.
So that's going to mean a few turns of reduced special attack damage on Sohaib's side of the field. That Electro Web, though, going for the speed drops, immediately getting that speed control down. No Dynamaxes. Instead, a Heat Wave from the Yveltal revealed, bringing that Zacian down to less than half its health, burning the Grimmsnarl and the Zacian. That is huge, as now Zacian's Behemoth Blade is going to do considerably less damage to that Yveltal, and quite frankly, give it the opportunity to go for another Heat Wave again.
Yeah, that was actually still a ton of damage for a burnt Behemoth Blade, so I'm also curious whether it's not like Advent Zacian rather than Jolly Zacian, but oh my goodness, the double burn. That doesn't really matter on Grimmsnarl as much other than chip damage and maybe reducing Spirit Break damage output, but the burn on Zacian is huge.
Yeah.
I really like Z's decision to not Dynamax on that first turn. The idea is to just get a Heat Wave off, because if you Dynamax and say Zacian switches out into Kyogre and you go for a Max Flare, like you just lose so much momentum, and so Z in a really, really fantastic spot right now.
Thunderbolt onto the Grimmsnarl, bringing it down to about 30% of its health. Another Heat Wave finding its mark, but missing the knockout on both of these Pokemon. That burn damage in between turns will finish it up, but for now, play rough into that Regieleki, followed up by a Spirit Break to guarantee the knockout.
Yeah, so maybe reading into a potential Yveltal protector, but also even if Yveltal doesn't protect, the idea of getting rid of Regieleki is nice because it's such a big threat to Kyogre, and so that paves the way a little bit. And so I'm off to a really rough start thanks to the double burn, right? If you don't burn the Zacian there, that start of the game is completely different. And so, yeah, you know, you did actually get the light screen up, but from Z's end, there are a lot of physical threats in the back, including the Zacian, and I'm wondering if they brought the Landers to you this time around, but it is still going to be Incineroar.
Incineroar against Zapdos, the Shining Star. I love these nice titles here on these Pokemon. And Kyogre, the Strutter, finally strutting on into this match.
You know, the thing is, while Z had a strong start to this game, this is actually an amazing position for Sohaib because you do pressure with like Max Airstream and Water Spout. And so, you know, Incineroar can maybe click Fake Out onto the Kyogre slot. The other interesting decision here is you don't necessarily need to Dynamax like Zapdos. You could actually max Kyogre here if you're expecting Fake Out into that slot, and then just Geyser the Incineroar slot, Thunderbolt into the Yveltal slot. And so, you know, Z's last one likely is going to be that Zacian. The problem for Z in this game is that, you know, what is your Dynamax option at this point? If your Zacian's in the back, that can't max. Incin doesn't feel great here, so basically feels like you have to max Yveltal. But then the max Yveltal might just faint to even a Thunderbolt from Zapdos. And so this is why Dynamax is such a core mechanic in Sword and Shield, and we often see games, you know, being decided quickly because one player just gets off to such a big start.
Yeah, I love how the Yveltal seems to have the perfect amount of chip damage where, you know, you would think that you probably do not want to Dynamax it. But in this position, it is going to be that Zapdos with the Dynamax on Sohaib's side of the field. Going to bring with it, oh no, I stand corrected, that is the Kyogre.
Yeah, so covering for the Fake Out, which is might be what's coming out here, but if you're Z, maybe, you know, what if you actually clicked Fake Out onto the Zapdos slot?
Well, here we go. It looks like another Dynamax. It has to be that Yveltal. I don't think you Dynamax Incin in this position. So I guess the big question is, like you were
saying, I was gonna say, you know, it's going after the Kyogre Dynamax,
yeah,
so
actually,
it's like,
that's a good point.
like you know, was it Choice Scarf Kyogre? Like that's what I was wondering at first. And so both players actually Dynamaxing maybe what was a unexpected Dynamax here, as Yveltal goes for the Protect. And so I feel like the Geyser's just gonna go into Instant here. Like Thunderbolt and Max Geyser there was always really safe. Geyser into Instant was always really safe because it covers for the Fake Out option from Incineroar. The only way you get around that is Fake Out Zapdos, maybe Dynamax the Yveltal. Oh, it hangs on!
Man, super effective. The Incineroar just barely hanging on. Going to be able to flip the weather back into a more sunny state of being, but looks like Sohaib just finding that damage exactly where it needed to land and threatening a double knockout this turn on both these Pokemon.
Yeah, the thing is, you still have the speed advantage if you're Sohaib, so you can just Thunderbolt, Yveltal, Geyser into Instant again, and so I would, you know, if you have Max Guard, you could, oh, okay, it's going to be the double Protect here.
A lot of unpredictable things happening in this game. That double Protect means Yveltal will be able to hang around for one more turn on the field, but Kyogre, Geyser into that Incineroar will finally, oh no, into the protecting Yveltal. Incineroar gets one more opportunity to attack.
Oh man, I mean that, so you go for that play because you assume Thunderbolt's going to KO the Yveltal, but now the Instant can get another powerful attack off. It's going to be a Max Strike. That's a really big deal because now you actually move before your opponent. So Z recognizing, hey, I don't really have anything better to do with Yveltal right now. If I just go for an attack, I'm just going to lose it, right? So might as well have a 1/3 chance to actually put myself in a much better position. I just can't believe Instant hung on from a Max Geyser from Kyogre, like with 2 HP as well, right? Because if you get the KO there, I think it's very difficult to win. But Z recognizing that a double Protect could be really good here. And so, yeah, now you can go for the Thunderbolt play again. But now you have to worry about the Yveltal outpacing you, so Zapdos is going to go for the Detect and not, you know, get KO'd by a Dark Pulse here.
And that's exactly what happens for once. We know the start of this turn pretty well. Max Darkness from that Incineroar will connect with the Kyogre. I think critically here, it's going to lower the defense of both of these, or special defense of both these Pokemon. So now that Yveltal is faster than the Kyogre and the Zapdos, would be dealing more damage if it wasn't for this Max Hailstorm finally finding the knockout on that Yveltal. And Z is down to their last Pokemon. Critically, though, this Kyogre running out of Dynamax terms, and there is enough speed control on the field thanks to that Max Strike from the Incineroar that whatever Pokemon is coming in here should have at least a little bit of an advantage.
Yeah, so you'd expect the Zacian, right? And oh, that's an interesting item reveal leftovers on Kyogre as well. So because of the safety goggles, Instant also actually critically does not faint, which means it's a 2v2 rather than a 1v2, right? Zacian alone in this position is pretty scary because you could pick up a knockout onto either Pokemon. And yeah, the Hailstorm there normally works, you know, to finish off Instant if you don't have safety goggles, but we actually knew that safety goggles already existed on the Incineroar there, and so that actually puts Sohaib in a tougher position as well, because now you no longer can go for like a stronger water type attack that's boosted by rain, right? So Zacian can probably take one big water type attack from the Kyogre, and so in this position, you know, like the question is with Zacian, who do you target? Do you have play rough? Zapdos does go for the Detect and gets it off.
All right, so we're even here. Behemoth Blade into that detecting Zapdos. Incineroar with the parting shot into the Kyogre, going to lower its special attack by 1 stage and give this Zacian even more of an opportunity to take an Origin Pulse, which is this Kyogre's attack of choice right now. Will connect with both Pokemon. So key things to note is the damage down onto the Zacian this turn was with both Pokemon on the field. It's going to switch to single target damage now, so you have to wonder if the Origin Pulse plus an attack from that Zapdos, assuming they both land, would be enough to pick up the KO.
Yeah, so Zapdos recognizing, hey, I got to just go for it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been such an interesting game with the Protects here. Now with Zacian, right, like, you have to be worried about Thunderbolt or Heat Wave from Zapdos, Kyogre, Origin Pulse. I think Zacian can take one more, so from Z's angle, you can just go for the target onto Zapdos, but because you're not running play rough, it's just, given that we saw the substitute, presumably, I'm not sure you can actually knock out the Kyogre here, and without the ability to KO Kyogre, 2 Origin Pulses will do it, so now from Sohaib's end, you just gotta hit the Origin Pulses.
Oh man, so much of these games already here today are coming down to luck, but Kyogre going for something a little bit more consistent with that Calm Mind to boost its special attack attack back up by 1 stage, also the special defense. So a bulk up Groudon in our first game, a Calm Mind Kyogre in our second game. What an incredible matchup this is turning out to be.
Yeah, Calm Mind makes sense with the leftover specifically. Like, that's the common item choice you run with Calm Mind. So the decision to Calm Mind there makes sense because it means rather than having to hit multiple Origin Pulses, you need to just rely on hitting one. And so, yeah, Z just goes for Sacred Sword. There's no play rough here. So that's a good amount of damage. Does Kyogre hit this attack? It is going to connect on the Origin Pulse.
All right, let's see how much this is going to do. Single target Origin Pulse.
Oh,
Zacian holds on. Will take damage from that Hailstorm, but I think...
It takes one more.
I think he can take one more.
Light screen wears off. I really thought Kyogre would get the knockout there with the Origin Pulse, but you can see the value of bulky Zacian. So many players in this event have been running it. Kyogre gonna go for the Protect, get that chip, a little bit of Hail Chip, right? But what an end game here.
What an incredible end game. Another Sacred Sword, and the Hail stops. Is that Zacian just holding on for long enough? I mean, certainly this Kyogre could roll for another Protect maybe to try and get some more health back from that leftovers, but I think it would need 2 or 3 more turns in order to take a Sacred Sword at this point.
It's a question of, do you think you can survive here? So let's see, Sacred Sword into bulky Kyogre, and Kyogre does feint! So like you mentioned, you could opt for the double Protect there, get 1 more chip of leftovers recovery, hope to pick up the knockout afterwards. But even after a Calm Mind boost, a single target Origin Pulse does not manage to knock out the Zacian, and this game was all about the Protects in the end,
right? It really
was.
was.
Z was off to a really good start, but I think the main issue for Z in that game is that they did not get too much out of the... Actually, Instance Dynamax was a lot more valuable than I expected it to be, just because it hung on with 2 HP there, right? And so that's one of the interesting things about using a leftovers Calm Mind Kyogre. You often forego some of your offense for bulk, right? And so like it's not max special attack, and as a result, you don't knock out that Incineroar there.
Yeah, you have to wonder though, it was such a close roll. If that was one of those situations where maybe the Kyogre just didn't do as much damage as it could possibly do.
Yeah.
But even then, you know, Z could have gone for the Max Strike a turn earlier and used that as a form of speed control. So I think saving Dynamax there was just a very smart call from them going into that game too. And now in game 3, you know, I have to wonder, do you try and play that slower again? Or do you just try and go for the big damage immediately with that Yveltal and Regieleki? Because that is such a scary lead to be standing down, you know, regardless of what your matchup is against it.
One thing to talk about in that endgame is Sohaib went for Calm Mind so that you can only, you like ideally rely on 1 Origin Pulse, but it took 2 Origin Pulses anyway, so he's probably wondering, oh, maybe I should have just clicked Origin Pulse twice, and if I hit both, I win the game there immediately. So it's a tough position. I thought +1 Origin Pulse single target would have gotten the knockout there as well, but the Zacian trained in a way to actually survive that attack, which is really impressive. So, you know, Z was able to win. They had a really nice early lead, but then, you know, Sohaib positioned himself really well, but then Instant critically hangs on, and Instant actually got 3 max moves off in front of a Dynamax Kyogre, which I don't think I would have ever expected, but the only reason that happened was because Z opted for that double Protect, recognizing, hey, there's no better play for me to make. And that's like the perfect example of when you go for a double Protect, because like you switching out or going for an attack doesn't give you any value. And so going into this third game, I mean, like Z has opted for Alecki and Yveltal both times. So from Sohaib's end, like, do you just run it back and go into Zapdos once again, right? I think Kyogre over Amoonguss feels stronger.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I like the adjustment there, but then it's like, do you feel comfortable bringing Grimmsnarl? Because it didn't actually do that much in the previous game. So you could just go back to Zacian and Zapdos if you expect Yveltal Alecki and run it back like game 1.
Yeah, I feel like especially knowing that the safety goggles is the item of choice on that Incineroar, unfortunately, as powerful as a Pokemon Amoonguss is, it's just not the right opportunity. I mean, maybe if you feel confident enough to just take out that Incineroar in the 1 hit, so you can then send out Amoonguss late game and just have it be there for Spore and redirection and all the annoying things it does, but it would be such a hard way to maneuver that. I feel like it's so much easier, at least mentally, to go for the Zacian, Zapdos, Kyogre, since they're going to hit hard, and they still give you a decent amount of mobility on the field. But Sohaib starting this game off a little bit similar to what we saw in that last game, that Zacian and Grimmsnarl, and an adjustment from Z. Regieleki's still there, but this time it's going to be their Zacian on the field next to it.
So Sohaib, maybe feeling comfortable with the lead, saying, okay, the only reason that didn't work out for me the previous game is I got burnt immediately by a heat wave. The odds of that aren't very high, and so if you don't get the burn, then I'm in a considerably better position. Z mixes it up a little bit, and I really like this adjustment because like Yveltal was in a really scary position that last game. Like, yeah, you get the heat wave off, but then you just potentially faint to the Behemoth Blade. And there's the scary phase, so we finally see the means of speed control from the Grimmsnarl going to drop the opposing Zacian's speed. But if the Zacian doesn't get a KO here, right, like, the opposing Zacian, Z could just double up onto either Pokemon here for a knockout, so I think something is fainting here from Behemoth Blade. Yeah,
Electro Web again, speed control onto Sohaib's side of the field. That Behemoth Blade will move next from Sohaib, going to target down the Zacian on Z's side of the field and misses the knockout just barely. Z free to go for their own Behemoth Blade on the Zacian, going to do big damage to either of these two Pokemon. Grimmsnarl is removed from the field, and that scary face will be all we'll see from that Pokemon this critical Game 3.
Yeah, and so I like the idea of getting rid of Grimm early, right? You still don't know its full moveset. It is just a really annoying Pokemon to deal with. And so the upside for Z right now is that you have this Electro Web control. I'm really curious if the Zacian's like speed tie here. I'd be surprised if it did, just because like the Zacians run a variety of EV spreads on these teams. But here, Regieleki can just go for a Electro Web once again, right? With Zacian, you could protect, or I wouldn't protect it. I'd probably consider switching it out, reset the speed drop, or if you know that like your max speed and you could go for that as well, but we obviously saw how like the Intrepid Swords went off in the first turn. And so I think Electro Web speed control right now really valuable for Z, and for Sohaib it's all about matching the Electro Web, so Dynamax's Zapdos and keep airstreaming with it, but ooh, no Dynamax with it.
And no switching either. That Electro Web will once again find its mark on both of the Pokemon on Sohaib's side of the field. These two Zacian both at -2 speed, but Zapdos with the Heat Wave connects with both the Zacian and the Regieleki. Gets a burn, too, on that Regieleki to maybe even things up from Game 2. But I think this Zacian on Sohaib's side of the field will find a knockout thanks to Sacred Sword. And Z is down to their last two Pokemon in this game.
So this is an interesting example of like going down in Pokemon, but it could actually be advantageous for you, especially because Sohaib decided not to go for the max Airstream there. Okay, here's another adjustment. It's actually going to be the Rillaboom to cover for the Kyogre. Your Rillaboom, not really making too much of an appearance here. And so now the Zapdos is, going to be speed dropped, and so Yveltal can Dynamax. You also have Fake Out pressure from Rillaboom, so something like Fake Out into Zacian, Dynamax the Zapdos, or Dynamax Yveltal and just Darkness into the Zapdos is certainly a play. That's why I was thinking you really need to Airstream with Zapdos there, because even though that turn works out, you get the double knockout, now the speed advantage is not in your favor, and so Zapdos basically feels forced to switch out right now, and it is going to be Kyogre coming out, but this is where Z making the Rillaboom adjustment is fantastic for them.
Yeah, Rillaboom is one of the most consistent counters, I believe, to Kyogre, being able to use Grassy Glide with grassy terrain on the field, not only to deal big damage, but to get priority attacks in as well. Another way that speed control is just ever so critical right now in Series 12. Yveltal will be the Dynamax Pokemon of choice for Z, and now would also be a fantastic time to start using those Airstreams and get some more speed control in.
Absolutely, yeah. Airstream or Darkness onto Kyogre this turn is fine because you have a Fake Out, but it is going to be that Airstream. Notably, though, no Fake Out into the Zacian slot. So I'm wondering if it's maybe a double up, as Rillaboom did not go for a Fake Out or a Grassy Glide. Could be something like a Wood Hammer or High Horsepower into that slot.
Yeah, and with that speed boost, I think Rillaboom now faster than the Zacian connects a High Horsepower for the knockout.
Yeah, that was, aggressive double up there.
Yes.
One play Sohaib could have made that would have been really, really hard to make this play, but it's like protect the Zacian, Dynamax Zapdos, and then Airstream to like regain your speed. And so, yeah, Z makes a wonderful play there, and Sohaib gets punished like really heavily for it. Now, the upside is that you reset the Zapdos' speed, but as you called out, you have now Airstream to give a speed boost onto Yveltal. So now Yveltal can just angle for a Max Darkness onto Zapdos, and then you can Grassy Glide Kyogre. Kyogre's in a really weird spot right now where it's like it doesn't feel like a good Dynamax option, right? Especially with the Calm Mindset, you don't do enough damage to pick up a knockout onto either Pokemon, so it feels like you kind of need to Dynamax the Zapdos. My question is, because Zapdos didn't Dynamax earlier, it took that much damage from Electro Web, can you even survive a Life Orb Max Darkness from the range that you're at. If not, then you can just Darkness Zapdos, you know, Grassy Glide into Kyogre.
Or even possibly Grassy Glide into that Zapdos if you
want
it. Yeah, just that little bit of chip damage could make all the difference here. But Sohaib, you know, down to his last 2 Pokemon, down to possibly one of the last turns, and does indeed decide to Dynamax that Zapdos. Will get some extra health points thanks to the power of Dynamax, but this turn ever so critical. Will the Grassy Glide
like you said, to guarantee the
Zapdos
KO.
Does a little bit of damage, followed up by that Max Darkness. Is this enough? And it locks in that knockout.
And I like that because even if Zapdos protects or Max guards there, and let's say Kyogre Dynamaxes, do you think a Max Hailstorm is going to KO Rillaboom or a Geyser KO's Evoltal, right? Given the damage output like Kyogre had from the previous game, you would think that the answer is no, right? And so for that reason, Z feels a little bit more comfortable doubling up there. It would have been close as to whether or not a Hailstorm would have KO'd Rillaboom, so like Sohaib's way around that is, you know, protect the Zapdos, Dynamax Kyogre, Hailstorm Rillaboom, and then you have a healthy Kyogre going into the end game against Evoltal. But now it's just Grassy Glide, Darkness, or Airstream, and the game's essentially over. So Z made some really wonderful adjustments. I think the Alecki Zacian lead was fantastic, bringing Rillaboom, realizing, hey, I need this to lock Kyogre in and, you know, have a slightly better matchup against it, and then also making 2 really great double ups back-to-back, doubling up on Zacian, getting the Airstream, KOing with the high horsepower, and then Glide Darkness just to guarantee the knockout onto Zapdos.
Yeah, I feel like it's really important in